head of the Southern African Times, and he's joining us live from the United Kingdom. Farai Muvuti is joining us in a bit as we analyze this situation. Many had already seen it coming. Several other people thought that maybe there would be a rethink of sorts for Mali, for Burkina Faso, and for Niger, but it looks like there is no turning back. My guest has just joined me. Farai Muvuti is the publisher of the Southern Africa Times, and he joins us from the United Kingdom. Hello, Farai. Good evening. Welcome to the show.
Hello, hi. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. Okay, great. We can hear you now. I was just giving my audience a little bit of background and all that led to, or the build up to the exit or the planned exit of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger from the ECOWAS bloc. And these are, I mean, aside from Nigeria and Ghana, these are very key neighbors of course, Nigeria, which is the head of ECOWAS as we speak. And that obviously would leave some sort of sour taste in the mouth of Nigerians. But let's start by looking at this move of these three countries leaving the ECOWAS bloc. What does this mean for ECOWAS and the states that make up that bloc?
Thank you again for having me. I think another important foundational point to mention is that the countries in question are founding members of ECOWAS as of its formation in 1979. So they're critical members in the context of not only security cohesion, but equally for economic cohesion by virtue of the multiple bilateral setups that have been created as a consequence of the formation of ECOWAS. And if you look at ECOWAS historically, it has been of great significant impact in at least 12 countries of the 15 members, be it interventions in the Côte d'Ivoire, post-election concerns in the early 90s, or if you look at even the initial coup that happened in Mali in 2015, equally in Burkina Faso, some of the disturbances that occurred in the early 2000s. So this particular cohesion as a multilateral institution within the region itself has been a cause for development. But equally a force by virtue of joint security partnerships that have enabled the enhancement of security for the Sahel region in particular, including the enclosure of the West African region in as far as the counterterrorism strategies have been employed. So any sort of separation, it creates a fragmentation within the context of not only security, but equally the economic aspects. And more so what you call the soft power elements, which include how you develop democratic governance by virtue of shared values, which have been part of the reasons why the bilateral arrangements would place into consideration some of these nuanced historical contexts that look into regional realities that are more material and germane to this particular grouping as well.
So, of course, it does take a lot away from ECOWAS and the bloc. But even as they have been given some extension to think about it, as they're even given up until July, even though their exit would be it would be agreed to, I think, January, yes. But then they're still giving them some window of opportunity to maybe have a rethink. But let's talk about the French factor in all of this. Like I said in my opener, the French government obviously has seen these countries showing them the door, out, and they're saying, leave our shores. We don't want to do business with you. I mean, we've also seen the newly elected Senegal president say something also in that light, even though they might not be as direct as these other three countries. Why do you think that France has left such a bitter taste in the mouth of these countries that they have decided to take this particular move or make this particular move?
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you again for the question. I think when you look at French history, the colonial history and the relationships between Francophone states or states that historically were colonized by the French, and more so how France continued to have a significant presence in the Sahel. And not only just from a security standpoint, but equally from an economic standpoint. If you look at the current currency framework that is utilized within the region itself, some of this, of course, as many academics have argued in the past, especially academics emanating from the region, have argued that this has had an insidious impact in terms of the economic projection, leading to economic stagnation, leading to further security concerns, because part of the prioritization of the Sahel security was not premised on the local realities and equally the social dynamic or contextual issues that may have led to perhaps some sort of resolution. So the pretext or the pretext of how terrorism is perceived was more so from a France or French or United States vantage point. And this, of course, has created a lot of tension, hence why you've seen that it's not an oxymoronic situation in which the militaries are the ones actually leading this particular instance, because they perhaps have a 360 approach to looking at the issue from a political standpoint and equally from a security standpoint. And the majority of the bulk of these issues tend to stem from security issues that perhaps may not, whose concerns may be equally steeped in economic challenges, which are social dynamical, but rather not looked at through that lens, but rather looked at through the French lens as one of the core funders rather of your joint operations, your peace missions and your counterterrorism insurgency sort of operations. So these concerns have been mounting, but more so there is that historical umbilical cord that France has found very difficult. Unlike a lot of France's partners, of course, the Brits have still maintained some level of soft influence, but it hasn't been as insidious and has not been as violently deliberate as the French. And the French have in the past been somewhat daring by intervening. For example, in Cote d'Ivoire, they intervened post an election on the basis of their own personal interests. And I think because France continued to expand its interest in a very deliberate manner, I think the politicization of the military itself, looking at this decolonial project, as it were, and if you look at most of the sentiments coming out of the three countries in particular, draw lines and draw parallels when it comes to the issue of coloniality and decolonization. So I don't think these issues are to be read in isolation in as far as the present material conditions. There is an interconnection between the present material conditions, and in order to reverse those present material conditions, there is a need to address the past.
And in pulling out of ECOWAS, I know that you're not French, you're not from Mali or all of this, but I mean, you do understand the geopolitics. In pulling out of the ECOWAS, I mean, I know that it's a statement of sorts, but does it address the past? And how do you, I mean, most of these countries are led by military juntas. Who's to say that the move or the position that they've taken is going to address the past? Can it be addressed with these guys as figureheads, leaders in their country?
Well, I think that can only be gauged by their local support, and I think the local sentiment tends to agree with the latter, that this can be actually confronted by an entity that is from the military, that has because the question of Mali and Burkina Faso and most Francophone states, it's been a question of who holds the citadel, where does power actually lie, and normally the country in such countries it assumes a militarization, and we look historically, if you look at Egypt, if you look at Ethiopia, some of the most progressive governments have been ones that have been military-led to lead to economic growth in particular instances. And I think Rwanda serves as a great case study to that effect. And so some would argue that actually the military would stand a better chance in confronting the issue, because they will have consolidated power to take care of the political dynamic and equally take care of the security aspects. There is an understanding of that holistical standpoint, but also what these governments have been quite smart in doing is taking the people with them and articulating with a sense of clarity what the vision is. And they've not been idle. They've been quite strategic in not only forging a federation, but equally looking at the internal dynamics and creating some sort of civil structures in which the operations of governance are still handled by technocrats where there is need, but the military has an overarching sight of foreign policy and issues around security, and especially when it comes to issues around budgeting. But there is a civil structure that continues to give guidance in that regard. And then if you look at what the issues that they've been immediate in terms of, with a sense of urgency, being able to address, it's really the issues of their ties to France. So correcting that particular historical imbalance and equally, one would equally argue, based on their own argument, is that the intervention of ECOWAS, to some extent, has violated that particular sovereignty, which has disallowed them or delayed the aspect of wanting to confront the issues of their colonial experience. And so ECOWAS stands in the middle. And I think it's to echo some of the points you were making earlier. I think it's a good thing that ECOWAS has taken a softer approach, because if you look back with their approach to Niger, for instance, the President Tinubu was quite adamant about the military, the military interventionist approach, which I think many analysts would have told him, and I was one of them in the forefront, saying that this will simply not work. What it will simply do, it will push these three countries into an isolated arena in which they have to work together. And immediately what they did was create their own confederation, in which they made the consideration to move out of ECOWAS. Not only just a consideration, it was actually an outcome in which all countries emphatically said they would not return based on those issues. And they cited the issues of insecurity from a basis of security, their sovereignty equally being jeopardized, and tying this to external influences. So ECOWAS, I suppose, in its new approach, to not be seen as to be for its decision making, or the citadel of its decision making, to be Western associated, it's taken a much more softer diplomatic approach. And in discussing that, they would need to refine a number of their policies and literally look at a transformative agenda that encapsulates the local realities and equally collectively looks at how better to adapt to the new reality, as it were.
I have just a minute before we go on our first break, but there are those who also have, query, just as you said, my president, who recently was in France and has been in France a lot, that he's been taking orders from them. That's why he was that adamant, in the beginning. But you have said that this soft peddling, one way or the other, would help. But I don't know. I don't see how this helps. But when we come back from the break, I want to talk about the fact that when these soldiers took over power in these three countries, the rejoicing, the partying in the streets, you could see how people reacted. But then there are those who also say that, all is not necessarily well, that ends well in these kinds of cases, especially when it comes to military rule in Africa. But when we come back, let's delve deep into that aspect. Farai Muvuti is with us here on Global Review, Hard Facts, 99.3 Nigeria Info. We're live on Facebook and on YouTube, Nigeria Info FM. You could join the conversation on X. Tell us your thoughts on these issues. But when we come back from the break, Farai is here to answer all your questions. Stay with us. Trust us on Hard Fact, whether it's politics, social issues, controversies, and trending stories. We're credible and objective.
It's Hard Facts.
You are listening to your number one station for talk.
99.3 Nigeria Info.
99.3 Nigeria Info. Let's talk.
In the cooking game, you need a winning game plan. I'm not just talking about your fresh ingredients, utensils, or cooking skills. I'm talking about your choice of seasoning. Your game plan is incomplete without Maggi chicken flavor. Made with a flavorful formation of onions, celery, turmeric, it's the game changer. Elevate the taste of your everyday dishes with delicious, rich chicken flavor. Oh yeah, let's go.
New Maggi chicken flavor, the game changer.
Mommy, you want to watch YouTube?
Not my phone again. Every time YouTube.
Oh, mommy, you want to watch YouTube?
You want to watch YouTube? Not with my phone. Go and watch TV.
But there's no YouTube on our TV.
That's before. With the new Airtel Smart Router, for just 25,000 naira, you can watch YouTube and more on any TV. Even our own TV.
Really? Yay! Thank you, Mommy.
Oh, you're welcome.
This season, turn any TV into a smart TV with the Airtel Smart Router and watch Nollywood movies, football, and lots more on YouTube with unlimited data for 30 days. Airtel, a reason to imagine.
Nigeria, brace yourself. Boxing Day will never be the same. Balmoral Group, in collaboration with Game Rush, proudly presents Chaos in the Ring. A night of explosive boxing action featuring multiple thrilling bouts, capped off with the ultimate showdown. Taiwo Eshekbo Agbaje, a boxer forged from the grit of the streets, takes on Rewan, real showboy Lawal, a decorated military officer trained to dominate. For the undisputed IBO All-African Featherweight title. This fight isn't just about title, it's a stand for resilience, a fight for our lives. You can't miss this electrifying night of boxing like you've never seen before. Enjoy pulsating music, mouth-watering food, epic celebrity bouts, and so much more. All goes down on Boxing Day, December 26, 2024, at the iconic Balmoral Convention Center, Victoria Island, Lagos. Chaos in the ring. Be there to witness history. Get your tickets now.
Auntie, you are enjoying, oh? Only you. Peppered rice, amala, nkwobi, masa, cake, and now ice cream. I hope you have Justifies on you.
Justifies? I never leave home without it.
That's right, Justifies.
The new natural effervescent powder for an instant refreshing relief
From heartburn and stomach indigestion, just add Justifies into cup of water, drink, and you're good to go. Justifies, your relief on the go. Justifies is from the House of Justide. If symptoms persist after 3 days, consult your doctor. Made and marketed by Ranbaxy Nigeria Limited, a Sun Pharma company.
Start your day and have a good time.
Kivo Creamer.
Oh, where you need to have the break time.
Kivo Creamer.
If not tea, or garita.
Kivo Creamer.
Kivo Creamer. I'm in love. Sonia tomato mix, stand up. Easy to open, easy to squeeze, easy to scoop, and easy to store.
Sonia tomato mix in a new stand-up pouch.
My father taught me that there are two kinds of people: those who try to survive and those who thrive. Those who stare at the angry bull from a distance and those who take it by the horn. Those who love to admire, fantasize from afar, and those who see, like, and make it theirs. We see this a lot at Foreshore Waters. So, which are you? Person who will just admire the idea of a fully built 2-bed apartment in Ikeja GRA, but go home empty-handed, or the winner who will pay the affordable price to own one? Like many of our customers at Foreshore Waters, you could either resell for profit in a few years or earn annual rental income of up to 10 million naira.
Own a 4-bedroom luxury maisonette in Ikeja GRA at 89.99 million naira initial deposit and spread the balance over 12 months.
Terms and conditions apply. Call 0700-666-688 today or visit fwl.ng or our office at 27 Banana Island Road, Ikoyi, Lagos.
Let me ask you a question. What holds you back when you wake up each morning? Is it the uncertainty of how the day will unfold? And as the day goes on, what makes your heart race? Is it the quiet fear that maybe you're not doing enough? And when it's evening, is it the longing for just a little more time? Whatever it is, remember, challenges don't define you, but how you rise to meet them. Staying connected to your dreams, that's how you break free from limits. Get unlimited data plus up to 6-hour battery backup to keep connected without interruptions on Airtel 4G 5G Smart Connect. Visit the nearest Airtel shop to find out more. Airtel, a reason to imagine.
For ventures, you go be controller. Whether you did for banana or zanga. For sports book, I'm just a joke. Make you they build your bet, just a cook. I see no fit on you to controller.
Be a part of the action. Your first bet is on us. So register now and get 100 naira in free bets to start playing. Bet King. Every bet is an adventure. Terms and conditions apply.
That feeling, that's Bet King.
Find amazing treats for everyone this holiday with Showmax. Celebrate like a champion with soccer.
Very well taken.
Find your festive inspo with our masters of style.
That's what I'm here for.
Embark on a fun-filled global adventure.
Here we go.
Share your love moments with family and friends.
My son, the most handsome.
And enjoy some truly royal spoils.
I want the power to control what happens in my life.
Only on Showmax, because everyone deserves a holiday treat.
Mr. Teacher, please, what happens when children come to school? How is it that they leave home very neat and return looking so different?
Non-stop action, ma. All the learning and sports burn energy. So those sweat stains, torn uniforms, and dirty shoes, they show that your kid has been very active.
Now, wow.
Your kids need nourishing energy. Give them the new and improved Milo at breakfast. It has nutrients that support energy release to help them get the most out of their day. Milo, energy to go further.
With Money Master, Nigerians everywhere can now open accounts, send, collect, save, and deposit money from anywhere and to any bank with any kind of phone. We can also pay bills, buy airtime and data for ourselves and our loved ones, and so much more. Just dial *995# or download the Money Master PSP app today.
Money Master, the easy way to master your money.
You define better odd. I be you one play cause over 1.5. I be you one bet say both seem no go score at all. Yeah, we get better payout. No worry, we there for you. Our odd chabrat out. In a day for bet baba. We win money, bet baba. Cash out today easy or bet baba. We get online games for you to play. All God all I want. Yeah. We get better bonus. And if we not that Welcome to Bets Baba.
Register now on betsbaba.ng. Not for people under 18.
5 Alive Poppy. So much pop. So many ways to pop it. He gulps it. She chews it. He slurps it. Feel the pop in every bowl. Everyone pops it their way. So, how do you pop it?
Lagos! Are you ready? Feel the pulsating energy of the city like never before as the Lagos State Government and Chain Reactions Africa present the Lagos Shopping Festival. It's a season of deals, discounts, culture, comedy, concerts, drinks, dance, gaming, food, and fashion. It's all happening at Mobolaji Johnson Arena, Oniko, Lagos, and 5 other malls across the city of Lagos. Date is the 23rd, 24th, and 25th of December 2024. Time, 72 hours non-stop. Come with your brands, wallets, and party shoes to Africa's largest shopping festival. For sponsorship, partnership, and bookings, call 0803-710-0731 or 0704-782-7000 or email info@lagosshoppingfestival.com. Lagos Shopping Festival, a different shopping therapy. Powered by Zenith Bank, Indomie, Mini-Me, Power Oil, Omnibiz, Guinness, and First Bank.
My dear festive saints, rejoice and celebrate. Good times are here, bargains for everyone.
This festive season, My Dear is bringing joy to every home.
Lots of freebies, such as 100 cartons of noodles, 200 umbrellas, and 100 bags of rice to celebrate this season with your family while stock lasts.
Experience our range of products, refrigerators, freezers, cookers, inverters, and ACs with built-in AVS, Wi-Fi control with 70% energy saving.
Media?
No, it's My Dear.
Oh, My Dear.
Visit all our retail stores nationwide. Terms and conditions apply.
Good times are here, bargains for everyone.
My Dear, make yourself at home.
Stay sharp, fuel up, and be on top of your game. Power Horse is here to boost your energy and conquer the day. Don't miss out on an unstoppable offer for Niger. You can now buy Power Horse 250 ml for just 999 naira. And for those who need a little extra, grab the 355 ml for only 1,299 naira. Don't wait. Head to the nearest store today and fuel up. Power Horse, unstoppable you.
Everyone says I'm beautiful and bold. They say I'm fashionable. And to crown it up, very confident. And my secret is...
People say I'm good looking, funny, hardworking, and to crown it up, very confident. And my secret is...
So whether in the office or at home,
in the streets or on the dance floor,
anytime, any day, I never lose my confidence. And the secret to my confidence is Wazobia perfume.
Absolutely. Wazobia perfume gives the authenticity and long-lasting fragrance all day. That's my secret confidence.
Wazobia perfume is available in body spray.
Also available in supermarkets and markets near you. Wazobia perfume, the correct scent.
Attention, Airtel customers. If your line has been blocked, then this is for you. Head to the nearest Airtel shop with your NIN. Our friendly staff will help you get your line back up and running. Don't let a blocked line keep you out of touch.
Airtel, a reason to imagine.
For Naija, when something dey important, you go stress am.
Oh yeah, come now. This one, na better.
And as Pepsi 60cl long throat bottle don land.
Hey, madam, give me big refreshment.
That's one na Pepsi 60cl long throat bottle now.
Yes, oh, Pepsi 60cl long throat bottle na big refreshment, big value, big flex. In fact, this one na all round big things. No dull, go buy your own Pepsi 60cl long throat bottle, sharp. Pepsi, tasty for more.
Attention travelers, pack your bags. ValueJet now flies from Lagos to Owerri and Owerri to Lagos twice a week. Enjoy a great mix of modern convenience, affordable fares, and hassle-free travel on every flight. Whatever your reason for travel, ValueJet gets you there in style and comfort. To book your flights, visit our website at www.flyvaluejet.com or download our mobile app on Google Play Store or App Store.
ValueJet, wings for everyone.
Any platform can help you save. But when it comes to investing, you need a partner that you can trust and is committed to helping you achieve your goals. A partner with a global footprint, diversified investment options, and great returns that help you grow. You need RiseVest. RiseVest is your partner for dollar investments like U.S. stocks, U.S. real estate, fixed income, and Naira Savings Vault. Invest with RiseVest to earn interest between 8 to 15% in dollars and up to 25% in Naira. Download the RiseVest app or visit www.risevest.com to start investing. Rise, investments that help you grow.
The perfect Christmas gift should say,
I appreciate you.
I care.
I love you.
This Christmas, let Small Market help you say it all with our ready-made gift hampers and gift cards. Sharing joy is stress-free. Choose from over 20 beautiful hamper varieties or create your own custom hamper with your favorite items. Plus, we are offering you a special gift of amazing discounts across various products from now to January 1st.
Thank you, Small Market.
Visit any Small Market store nationwide to enjoy exciting Christmas offers. Because with Spar, joy comes already wrapped. Terms and conditions apply. Spar Market, there for you.
Mom, let's celebrate Christmas at its peak. I want Christmas lights so bright they could see it in space. Wow! I want a Christmas tree so tall planes would have to watch out.
Think bigger.
Like what?
Pancakes stacked to the ceiling, delicious eggs, and a peak milk smoothie.
Just for me. Now that's Christmas at its peak.
Because truly, a peak Christmas is Christmas with Peak. Peak. Reach for your peak.
Not my phone again. Every time YouTube.
Oh, mommy, we want to watch YouTube.
You want to watch YouTube? Not with my phone. Go and watch TV.
But there's no YouTube on our TV.
That's before. With the new Airtel Smart Router, for just 25,000 Naira, you can watch YouTube and more on any TV. Even our own TV.
Really? Yay! Thank you, mommy.
Oh, you're welcome.
This season, turn any TV into a smart TV with the Airtel Smart Router and watch Nollywood movies, football, and lots more on YouTube with unlimited data for 30 days. Airtel, a reason to imagine.
I miss the man I married. He never said no to anything I asked him to buy. But since he made massive profits from his first home in Horizon Estates, everything changed. Now, all he seems to do with his money is buy more homes at Horizon Estates because he wants more massive profits. New car?
No, let's save up to buy a home in Horizon Estates.
Vacation with the kids?
No, now. A home in Horizon Estates will pay for it later.
Even in his sleep.
Horizon.
Horizon Estates. Give me back my husband.
If you must be complained about, let it be for a good reason, like earning massively from a home in Lekki.
Own a two-bed apartment in Oniru, Victoria Island at 172.5 million naira outright payment when you buy 3 units.
Terms and conditions apply. For more details, call 0700 123 9002 or visit hzelekki.com or visit our office at Third Roundabout Access, Lekki Phase 1.
My kids love tasty snacks, but many snacks are not so good for them. That's why I love the new Milo Anna snacks.
We love it, Mom.
Yes, it's a delicious snack with the goodness of malt, milk, cocoa, and crunchy Niger-grown maize, containing calcium, iron, and fiber.
So, pack Milo and snacks in their lunchbox every day to help your kids refuel at break time and keep winning all day. Milo, energy to go further.
In the kitchen game, there are players and then Agba Ballers, MVP, Player of the Year, 10-0, no rival. Become an Agba Baller with the new improved Maggi chicken flavor, the game changer, made with a flavorful formation of onions, celery, turmeric to bring out your top game in the kitchen. Elevate the taste of your everyday dishes with delicious rich chicken flavor. Oh yeah, let's go.
New Maggi chicken flavor, the game changer.
Shop on Saleco, the new online marketplace. Set on Saleco, where buyers and sellers meet. Shop on Saleco, buy from Lagos Market. Shop on Saleco, like Balogun, Alaba, Computer Village. Shop on Saleco, buyers can negotiate prices. Set on Saleco, and sellers can join for free. Shop on Saleco, shop from your home without stress. Set on Saleco, boost sales, make plenty profit.
Introducing Saleco, the online marketplace where buyers can meet sellers, explore an array of products, bargain and get good deals. Just like open markets, save more by getting up to 50% discounts on items. That's right, while also enjoying 100 naira delivery fees within Lagos. This December, visit www.saleco.ng, SALEKO.ng to buy and sell now. Saleco, buy boku, sell barakata. Terms and conditions apply.
My ions, please, can't get enough. My ions, please, give it to me now. It go rehydrate you, yeah. Replenish your ions with Pocari Sweat. Rehydrate you faster, easily observe. Pocari Sweat, give me some more. Pocari Sweat.
Now every mama and papa they dream make their pikin succeed for life. Go put your pikin for Bridge International Academies where them go fit get ogbonge education wey go make them become better person for life. The good news be say school fees for Bridge International Academies na shikini money for inside Lagos and Osun State. Sharply enter www.bridge.sch.ng or call 0700 333 2222 to register your pikin and to know which of their school dey your area.
Hey there! Yes, you! You just won 5,000 naira cash! And you, sitting by the side, there's 1 month Showmax subscription to watch the Premier League waiting for you! You behind! Of course! You're not left out! How does 1,000 naira airtime and 2,000 naira Uber discount sound? All this could come true when you buy the No Unwrap and Win pack. Open it, look for a cube with a 6-digit code on its wrapper, text the code to 8011 and follow the prompts to stand a chance to win any of these instant prizes. Promo valid from July till December. Terms and conditions apply. Get extra value on the No Unwrap and Win pack. No, eat for good.
We're back.
We're back.
We're back.
We're back.
We are back.
We're back on 99.3 Nigeria Info.
right, 99.3 Nigeria Info is still Global Review, and I still have Farai Muvuti here. We're talking about the exit of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger from the ECOWAS bloc, and looking at the political, economic, and other implications. But then let's talk about, the politics of having the military takeover. Military takeovers have not necessarily have had a great history when it comes to Africa. And as much as many people saw, or what we saw in the news, was a lot of jubilation when the military took over in these countries, many people are taking it with a pinch of salt. For example, Nigeria, who had its fair share of military takeovers, it didn't necessarily go well for us. Not that the civilians are doing any better, but you know what I'm saying. Looking at that side by side, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, can one say that we would hold our breaths to see that the military would do good at the end of the day, or should we be pushing for a civilian takeover?
Like I said, there are many examples in Africa where military leadership has actually been a force for change. So, for example, Egypt, if you look at Ethiopia, and you equally look at Rwanda, these have been military juntas initially, and what they've been able to do is transform the economy. Now, of course, this is not a one-hat-fits-all approach, but based on the local realities, a lot of the civilian political framework simply tended to pander to the political framework, which had an influence from external forces. And part of the celebrations you saw was that there was a growing sentiment of an anti-French, anti-Western approach to governance, which a lot of the civilian leadership, primarily influenced by French influences, would not adhere to. And that particular reading required ECOWAS to equally look at that issue in its own realities. If you look at the Sahel, for instance, from the times of the operations in 2001, in which the French were quite involved in the Barkhane campaign, for example, these issues were equally raised. The influences in Sierra Leone, Senegal, and so forth, these are not new to the particular region. If you look at the issue of the currency framework, for instance, which impacts about 8 members within ECOWAS alone, these issues speak to neo-colonial geopolitical consequences that do not face or try to combat these different nuances and nuanced realities in their particular material conditions. And as a consequence, you have seen an outrage, as it were, from a civilian population. And that's why there's somewhat of a sudden relief that there's military that is awake to that particular reality. And also, one must consider that the military tends to be the most well-resourced institution in most African countries. And therefore, they have a well-rounded view of the day-to-day onslaught that creates the multerior conditions of our people on a day-to-day basis. So that's why I would argue that perhaps Nigeria has its own unique realities. But even if we look at Nigeria's history, for example, the initial coup that was done by your former president, for instance, considered quite progressive, considered quite powerful, raising issues of a refinery. Of course, these issues never materialized, but it was radically welcome, right? And we sort of saw historically it stabilized, and you equally get, people who came from the military in Nigeria, then became stalwarts of democratic practice. So not the entire Nigerian story is single. It's not a single narrative.
Yeah,
of course, there are instances in which those areas have been abused. But I think one must not read that to be the case when it comes to the local realities that are the preoccupations of the people of the Sahel.
Lovely. I have people who have sent in comments and questions, so let's go straight to WhatsApp and on X to read some of the messages. We're live, facebook.com/Nigeria Info FM. People have sent us messages and comments, so let's read. Someone on our YouTube here actually posted a comment, and I want to read that comment. The person actually, I think it was on X, saying that these three countries that are pulling out of ECOWAS can go because they have no contribution whatsoever to the economy of ECOWAS. I don't know if you agree with that. Let's see. I want to read that message. Imafidel Joseph says ECOWAS should allow these countries to go because they have no political impact on the organization. So yes, that is the message that person has. This one says, look at the hypocrisy of the leaders of these countries of the Sahel region. They are withdrawing their countries from ECOWAS, but they want their citizens residing in the countries of ECOWAS region to continue to enjoy free movement of persons and goods, which only ECOWAS citizens should enjoy. One of the implications of their withdrawal is that the million of Nigerians who live in Nigeria will have to start paying for the residence permit. Also, about 3 million Burkina Faso citizens in Ivory Coast will either pay for their residence permit over there or go back home. And this is from Andose Joseph. Would you mind to respond to those comments?
Yeah. In terms of I think it would be misinformed of us to suggest that these economies don't necessarily contribute anything to the ECOWAS ecosystem, because these are not only just any mere countries; they are founding members of ECOWAS. Okay. And second, when it comes to the security texture of the region, the Sahel has a direct impact on Nigeria itself. For example, Niger. If the security issue concerns in Niger dilapidate, they have a direct impact on the economy and the health of security of Nigeria itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
To argue that Niger has simply no direct influence on impact is purely to be misguided and to be not well read. These countries are clear strategic countries by virtue of location and by virtue of vocation in the context of security. And this is why ECOWAS itself is adamant, if it was the case, for example, as people are saying it to be, that these countries have no particular influence, there would be no rationale for ECOWAS to extend the timelines in which these countries are to exit. In fact, ECOWAS's hard stance, by virtue of that particular arrogance, has taught them and dealt them quite a heavy hand, by virtue of these countries further consolidating their own bases and creating an alternative. Now, when it comes to the movements of people, these things are dual, because remember, Nigerian businesses equally rely on these markets. The ECOWAS arrangement, the bilateral economic arrangements are mutual. They are not exclusive to one bigger economy rather than the other.
I wish we had enough time, but our time is fast spent, Farai. This is a very interesting conversation that must be had. In fact, just like you said, many are not well read when it comes to the historical positions, or rather the fact that these guys have been there from the start, and so we're just very emotional about it. But maybe we'll revisit this conversation sometime in the future. Farai Muvuti is the publisher of the Southern African Times, and he's been with us on Global Review. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We appreciate it. All right.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, we'll go on a quick break, Lagos, and when we come back, we have some information for you. On the 5 o'clock hour, we're revisiting the budget presentation from
more
yesterday.
Conversation, more talk, more right after this.
Let me ask you a question. What holds you back when you wake up each morning? Is it the uncertainty of how the day will unfold? And as the day goes...
99.3 Nigeria Info. We are more than just radio. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Nigeria Info FM. Check us out on Facebook at Nigeria Info 99.3. Follow us on Twitter at Nigeria Info FM and on Instagram at Nigeria Info FM Lagos for live updates as it happens. 99.3 Nigeria Info. Let's talk.